Hello, welcome to the Stockyard Industrial Lead. I'm Eric Miller, and today I'm going to be talking about creating an image or a brand for your model railroad. Basically, how do you create a logo for a railroad? What goes into it? I'm going to give you my experience behind it. I'll admit I'm not a marketing major. This is not something I do for a living, but I've been model railroading now for like 25 years. I've been coming up with my own logos and graphics for railroads for quite a while. And so I just thought I would share my experiences with it in the hopes that it can benefit some of you out there. If anybody is thinking about creating their own image for either a freelance railroad, a proto-freelance railroad, or if you just want to kind of change your image as I've done, kind of refreshed one of my images. And it also, I think, applies to prototypical railroads too, because what we have to do with the prototype is we have to look at what they look like, and then how do we present that on our model railroad. So I'm going to take you through the story of the South Omaha Terminal and introduce its new logo. And I'm also going to show you how basically I created a logo for that, and also the original South Omaha Terminal logo. And I'm also going to show you how that translates into creating decals and graphics for if you want to do shirts or merchandise. And I'm also going to talk about how I use that on the layout. So that's what we've got in store today. Definitely a lot to talk about. I hope you find this interesting and helpful. And also I'm going to announce this new project that I just wrapped up, which is a CF7 for the South Omaha Terminal, which is the railroad that operates here on the Stockyard Industrial Lead. And so we're going to be taking a look at that project and basically how that translates into the logo design. All right, so here we go. So first, I want to give you a little bit of background on the history of my logos and graphics that I've created. Some of you might recall way back in the day, I started out, so this was probably like 15 years ago. I was modeling some of the SPSF, which is still what I model today a little bit. And so the SPSF is kind of an interesting proto-freelance because it was a railroad that almost existed, right? And so, but it didn't quite. And so you have to do quite a bit of creative stuff. And I feel that as model railroaders, we all have to be creative because we're basically creating something that doesn't exist, right? I mean, even though if we're 100% prototypical, we're still on our layouts creating something that really doesn't exist because it's going to have some compression. There's some compromises that we have to make. There's some little changes that go in here and there. So it's always not going to be 100% correct. So with the freelance or a proto freelance, we get to involve even more creativity in our design. And so that's what I want to talk about today. So I've done some with the SPSF. I was doing a modern Rock Island there for a while, and then I switched back to the SPSF. And as I kind of settled into my concept, what I really wanted to focus on was the short line that runs here in South Omaha and Bellevue, Nebraska, eastern Nebraska. And so basically what made the most sense to me was to have the South Omaha Terminal operating the Stockyard Industrial Lead, which is a former Rock Island. And the South Omaha Terminal has a pretty big association with the SPSF. The SPSF in my world has trackage rights into Omaha, just like the Katy and the Kansas City Southern really does now. And so the SPSF is part owner in the South Omaha Terminal. All right, so the South Omaha Terminal is a rail railroad that lasted up until 1978, and then after that it was turned into the Brandon Railroad. And I really don't like the name Brandon Railroad. With apologies to anyone named Brandon out there, I just don't think it's a good name for a railroad, especially an urban terminal railroad that could be really cool and have more character to it, right? I mean, I would not want to have a railroad named the Eric Railroad. It just sounds dumb, right? South Omaha Terminal is really cool. There's a lot of history, a lot of heritage behind that. So I decided I would keep the South Omaha Terminal name going. But what I wanted to do was to kind of continue the image of the Brandon Railroad, essentially. So that's what I decided to follow. And then recently I had a little change in path. When I was modeling the SPSF Railroad, I decided that the Golden West Service would continue to exist because I really like that, even though that was something the Southern Pacific started. And I thought what would really be fascinating to me is if the Golden West Service, which many of you may know that it was a way for the Southern Pacific to sell off a lot of its old freight cars and then lease them back after they were rebuilt and repainted. And so what I thought would be cool is to have that kind of continue to exist, but specifically to help with short lines and regional railroads, because the SPSF would not be as cash strapped as the Southern Pacific was back in the day. So that's what the Golden West Service is. And as a program to help regionals and short lines, they can also use these graphics. So that's why I decided to change it up and have my new paint scheme for my new locomotive, which I've always wanted to do a CF7. And I thought, well, let's add one to the roster because I think it would make sense for them to have a couple of like general purpose road switchers. All right, so that said, we've got our new image here, but I also wanted to retain the old image. And so the original image of the South Omaha terminal, like I said, matches the Brandon Railroad. So this is a locomotive here, this Jeep 9. I really heavily use the Brandon image, and I'll show you that. I also use it on some of my vehicles and also a caboose. So those are some examples of how you want to use your image on the layout. Is obviously your rolling stock and locomotive. So when you're coming up with a new logo, you always have to think of, well, what's your paint scheme going to be for the railroad? And also, do you want to use it on station buildings? So for example, this is the Albright Depot, which is now the yard office for the South Omaha terminal here. I've still got the old Rock Island logo there, but I'm definitely going to add a modern sign that will have the South Omaha terminal logo on it. And then other things off the layout are like these little diagrams that I have. I have the Stockyard Industrial Lead logo, which basically takes the Rock Island logo and just puts Stockyard Industrial Lead in it. And then I also show people, this is the South Omaha Terminal Yard Office and Transload facility. So the logo is used there as well. You can also use a logo on a lot of property stuff for the railroad, like bridges, any buildings associated with shanties, sheds, that sort of thing. So you really want to think as you're coming up with a logo, you want something that will look cool on a locomotive, maybe passenger cars, but also think of how it's going to be used to show off the property that the railroad owns on your layout. So there's some things to consider. All right, so with that, I think we'll go into talking about how I developed the South Omaha Terminal logo and the sort of techniques that I used and the resources. Okay, the real Brandon Railroad in South Omaha has a variety of equipment, and I use this real roster to develop my own roster, and I also use it to develop my image. I think what's really important for anyone doing a fantasy or freelance or even a proto-freelance railroad is to try to use a real prototype logo and paint scheme out there, so that way it looks very realistic. And so I think it's a good idea to have a few examples that you can say, hey, this is what I want to do. This is kind of what I'm trying to create here. So the Brandon Railroad in my era has basically all these locomotives. They got a Jeep 7 from the Northwestern, which was an original Rock Island. They had the C415 for a while, which I modeled prototypically in its previous paint scheme, which I'll show you here. It's this Railcar America paint scheme. So I did that. So I've got that example to really tie in the prototype. But going back to these, they also had an NW2 switcher that they got just before my kind of early to mid 90s era. The Jeep 7 came kind of in the mid 90s, right around when UP acquired the Northwestern. And so I thought, well, maybe I should do a Jeep something. That's where I came up with the Jeep 9 idea, and I think the CF7 also fits in here as well. The reason I didn't do the NW2 switcher is because of the length of my industrial spur is more than what the Brandon Railroad actually switched back in the day. And so I figured they would need something that, can go a little bit farther and be more of a road switcher, not just a switcher. But I really wanted to use this. And so if you look at my Jeep 9, you'll notice that it's same color and the same kind of logo. Okay, but how did I develop that logo? Well, what I did is I started out using Microsoft Paint. Back in the day, I used to have access to Adobe Illustrator for free. I don't anymore. So Adobe Illustrator is a really good program for making logos, but if this is your first foray into doing any kind of graphic design on a computer, it might be a bit much to learn. Microsoft Paint is very simple to use. And so basically what I did is I took this logo and created this South Omaha Terminal logo, modeled it very closely after the Brandon Railroad scheme. Now you'll notice that with this logo, it's just a simple PNG. So as you zoom into it, you notice that a lot of these lines get really rough and look weird. So what I had to do is convert it into vector format, which is here. Now you notice the lines look a lot smoother when you zoom in. And so this is better for when you're developing decals, and if you want to print this on any kind of merchandise, you want to do a vector format. Creating a logo into a vector format is easy. Just Google like PNG to vector online, and you'll find there's multiple sources out there for free that'll let you upload your logo and convert it to a vector format. And there you go. Just be careful for any, don't click on any links that might put viruses on your computer. That's something you've always got to watch out for when you're doing a free program. Okay, so now that we've got that discussion out of the way, I can show you the other trick that I do. You'll notice with this logo, it's got, let's see, I'm trying to see if I'm, I think I closed it out. Let me go back to my vector image. Okay, with this logo, you notice there's a lot of white in it. Obviously, if you're printing this on a t-shirt, especially like I did a variation of this logo. Let me show that to you. Let's see. Okay, this one I did on a t-shirt, a blue t-shirt. And so you obviously don't want to print the blue. That looks kind of dumb. You want it to look like on the locomotive, right? Just blue background. So what you'll need to do is to convert your logo to a transparent background. And again, this is where you just look up online PNG to transparency or transparent background. And I'll show you an example here. I think this is the one that I used right here, make PNG transparent, online PNG tools. But there is my search right there. So just do that. You can again upload your image and it'll turn it into a transparent one with a transparent background instead of white, which is what this is. It's obviously very hard to tell because it's just an all white back here, but it is transparent. So that's the other thing that you want to do with your image. And then after that, after you've created your image, and again, the way I did this was simply drawing like lines and boxes. I used some, I made sure to kind of look up what font was used and try to find the best fit. Again, for fonts, you'll find a lot of fonts online for free that you can download. Just try to type in whatever font you want and then include the word free in it. And then again, watch out for any potential viruses out there. And then the other source that I use that I'll show you is a site called What the Font. This is really cool because you can actually go to this page and you can download an image. So if you have a picture, a really good picture of lettering on a boxcar. So for example, when I was doing my South Omaha terminal, I used this for, I'll watch out for those ads. I used a good picture of a Golden West Service boxcar and I put it in here and it was able to identify what the fonts were on that. So then I was able to use that when I developed my South Omaha terminal logo, which came out to like this. And I'll show you, this is the image that I used on What the Font. See, pretty good lettering there. And then this is what I came up with on Microsoft Paint with the font, which was like a 20th century, I think, condensed bold is what it was called. And then so I easily converted this into a font and again, created a logo with a transparent background so that I could make something like the sweatshirt that I'm wearing today. And then I also use this when I create decals. So I used to make my own decal sheets when I had Adobe Illustrator again. Now that I don't have it, I have the PDC Precision Design company that I use for my decals. I basically send this logo to them and say, this is what I would like to use on my decal. And then I also tell them what the font is in case that helps. And so that way they've got all that information they need. And then that's basically what they need to for the logo. So then you're actually doing a lot of the design work yourself and hopefully don't have to pay for that. So that's how I created my logos. And like I said before, I just figured that the South Omaha terminal could use a little logo refresh. At the same time, I was thinking of doing the CF7, and I thought, how cool would it be if I put this new logo scheme idea on the CF7? And then it's also neat because I like how it shows a history or progression of the railroads. You're going from, what it used to be back in the day, this, to now it's this. And this also shows the SPSF influence as that's increasing as well. So it's kind of a cool little story that you can show in just a couple of locomotives. So imagine if you have a fleet of 20 or 30 locomotives, you have a larger railroad or larger layout than mine, you can really tell a story there. So just think about all the colors that you see, when mergers happen today, for example. Okay, so that's kind of the basics behind designing the paint scheme and everything. The other thing I will talk about next is kind of how to come up with a paint scheme and colors. And I'll show you my what I've painted. Okay, so back here at the art office, I'll show you some examples of paint schemes and what I take into consideration when developing a paint scheme. So again, if you're using a relevant example, this makes it easy on you. And so with the Brandon Railroad, like I mentioned before, I just tried to do exactly what they did. And so this is a caboose that I painted along with the GP9. And when I was doing the research, I noticed that it looked like they had kind of a Conrail blue going on, but it also looked a little bit faded. And so I went with Great Northern blue, partly because I do like the Great Northern Railroad. So I thought that would be cool. It turned out a little bit lighter than I wanted because I wanted a little bit more contrast with the light blue logo here. But again, it does look a little faded, and this is supposed to be the older scheme as opposed to the newer one. So that's good. But anyways, you want to think about when you're designing this, how is your fleet going to look? And if you want multiple locomotives together, if you want to do passenger cars and that sort of thing, what's it going to look like across multiple fleets? And what colors are you going to use? You also want to take into consideration, how hard is it going to be for me to paint this myself? This scheme is really easy. It's just blue. So I didn't have to do any striping or anything. When I decided to create my new paint scheme, basically I just went with what Golden West service boxcars look like. And I looked up what the blue paint was online. And most people, because there'll be internet forums out there where other modelers discuss this, so you don't have to. Most people seem to agree that it was B&O Royal Blue, so I went with that. This came out a little bit darker than I wanted to, but again, at least it's a new locomotive, so I think it looks pretty nice. And using some dull coat kind of helped tone it down a little bit. And then I decided to go with some yellow ends because I thought that would be cool and give it a little add some brightness. You want to have good visibility when you're blowing through those grade crossings. That's something you want to think about when you're designing these railroads. So that's why you might think of coming up with chevrons and other things to put on the front of a locomotive or diagonal stripes. So then I decided to go with reefer yellow for that. The main reason I did that is because of my friend Ron's Western Railroad. I believe he used reefer yellow on the ends, and I thought that would kind of be cool and create a link to that. Thinking about it again, I probably should have went with a Santa Fe yellow since it's kind of SPSF. But I think this worked out just fine. One thing you'll notice, the yellow matches the decal yellow pretty well, and PDC was able to send me. This was really nice of them. Was able to send me a example of a bunch of different yellows that they had. And so then I cut out several that look close. I painted a sample, and I was able to pick the yellow that matched, and then that way the decals then match the yellow I'm using on the locomotive. So that's something to consider too. If you're painting the locomotive, you want the decal to match it, or else another idea is like with this one, you just have a color on the decal that doesn't really matter, right? You're not using that color anywhere else, and so the paint is totally different. But anyways, this is how the decal kind of came out, and I printed some extras, like some small ones in case I want to do a caboose like that. Also some smaller SOTs and really tiny ones if I want to do more vehicles, like this one. And so I think it's always cool to have these crew or maintenance away vehicles. So that's what you got to think about, your whole fleet and how you want it to look. So that's kind of how I designed the paint scheme. Again, there's a lot of really good resources out there if you just look online or look at books for designing railroad paint schemes. Some of the earliest paint schemes, like on F units, EMD came out with a lot of electromotive EMD came out with a lot of different templates for their railroads to use, and they actually designed a lot of those famous paint schemes like the Rock Island's maroon and red on silver, the Santa Fe's war bonnet. A lot of those were just done by EMD because they looked great on an F unit. So that's the other thing you got to consider is the locomotive type that you're putting the paint scheme on, and also the era too. You know, like is it going to be kind of the drab 60s, 70s, 80s? You started to see more splash of colors, and then in the 90s you saw a little bit of throwback to some of the heritage schemes. But then you've also got some like efficiency paint schemes out there, especially the ones done in the 50s, like the infamous Jenks dip scheme of the Missouri Pacific and Rock Island, the solid maroon or the solid blue. So think about stuff like that. And again, it tells a story, right? It talks about what era it's in, might show kind of the leadership style. You've got paint schemes named after leaders of railroads, like the Northwestern Zito yellow. You've got the Grinstein green with the BN. So think about the story that you want to tell too. This is what I really love about model railroading, is being able to show your creativity and just let that come out. So basically that's kind of the thinking that goes into it for me. And so that's basically the paint scheme. So that's about all I've got for you today. But let me wrap it up here in a little bit. Okay, so like I said, I think that covers everything that I wanted to discuss today. I talked to you about, gave you a lot of background behind, logos, why you'd want to change it, why you want to create your own, even with prototype railroads, the kind of stuff you have to consider with labeling on your model railroad, the imaging that you want to portray, and make sure that it's kind of this cohesive, everything kind of matches, so it's one railroad that you're presenting, or if you have multiple railroads, you will definitely have multiple logos, but making sure that it's intentional where these logos are, right? And then I kind of talked to you about creating a logo, some of the references you can use, and then the resources with creating the graphics, and then using that for decals, or if you want to make your own t-shirts, or even if you want your logos on like if you've got like aprons or something for your crew, that sort of thing. And then even using logos on like diagrams, or I also use them on my employee timetable and the switch list that I give to crews, stuff like that. And then also the things that you need to consider when you're coming up with the paint scheme. How many locomotives is it going to be on, what type of rolling stock, and that sort of thing. So all these things that you got to think through, and it might make sense to kind of write these ideas down, and then kind of develop different pros and cons and that sort of thing. So I hope that was helpful, that kind of sharing my experience behind it. I really enjoy being able to tell people things that I've done, so that if it's helpful for anyone out there kind of doing the same thing, that way you have some ideas out there. If you have any questions or anything about this, let me know. If there's a certain aspect of what I showed you today you want me to go into more detail with, let me know that too in the comments, and I'll be happy to make another video. But up next, I'm going to do an ops video for showcasing the CF7 and how it runs. And then after that, I want to do another JMRI video because I've gotten questions about that. And then I'm due for another layout update here. So there's been a few changes that I can show you finally. So we'll plan to do that around the holidays. Okay, so that's what I've got for you today. Hope you enjoyed it all. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll catch you next time here on the Stockyard Industrial Lead.